Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Let's talk One Piece, specifically the Zou arc of the Whole Cake Island saga. Now, we define ourselves oftentimes in relation with others so that our identities in some ways rest upon a sense of belonging and connection with some groups and to some degree not belonging to other groups. Such dynamics of loyalty and kinship are a major feature of One Piece, a story that explores kinship and othering in myriad ways. And the Zou arc shows us how this process is fundamental to our identities and our conception of ourselves. So how do we form and recognize connections? Well, some small examples from the Zou arc include Edward Weevil and Miss Buchan. Now, Edward Weevil is the supposed son of Whitebeard, and I do have my suspicions about the authenticity of this claim. Probably Edward believes it, but I think that Miss Buchan is a bit of a manipulative sort. And I also am suspicious because of the way Edward is sewn together. You can see the sort of Frankenstein-style stitches on him, making me wonder if he's had a lobotomy or something of that nature. But also just it seems to me that Miss Buchan is not quite being forward here. But the fact that she insists again and again makes me think methinks she doth protest too much, perhaps, in insisting that Edward is the natural son of Whitebeard. However it may be, I'm sure I'll find out the truth or falsity of this claim. This is an example of a claim of kinship and an assertion of identity. It may rest on a falsehood in this case, but this is a claim of identity based on biological paternity. And the result, I think, is probably likely to be unhappy because of the falsehood inherent in it. And also, it seems to me that people really do fool themselves sometimes. We delude ourselves very efficiently when it comes to claims of identity to groups that we have perhaps a less strong claim to than we might think. It's also interesting to me that you have the claim of biological tie with Edward claiming that Whitebeard is his father, and you see a very different set of values at play here. It seems to me obvious right from the beginning that Edward and his mother, Miss Buchan, are a very destructive force, unlike Whitebeard and his family, his sons. Now, they were, though they were pirates, they were definitely a force for order and good in the world. And it seems to me that this claim of kinship rings false because of that difference as well. But let's see how that all plays out. Another example of two families or networks of loyalty that we see here are the Revolutionary Army and the Blackbeard Pirates, and things are not looking very good for the former. The Revolutionary Army has been defeated by the Blackbeard Pirates at this point, and it is a source of concern for Luffy as well, because number one, his father, Dragon, is the head of the Revolutionary Army, and he doesn't really know his father that well, but Sabo is among them. And this is another example of how a claimed identity in the form of a found family can be more important than one's biological family, because Luffy is obviously more concerned about Sabo. Now, his father is a source of curiosity, perhaps, a bit of concern, but he's really concerned about Sabo here and what's happened to him, and so am I, honestly. You also see another network here in Buggy's growing influence and his followers, also, again, based on a lot of falsity. So there's a lot of interesting claims to identity based on false pretenses going on here. And I'm sure we'll see what hijinks Buggy is getting into in the future as well. But the main show here is, of course, Zou, which is an island, I guess. Not really, though. It is a giant elephant, really. So that signals its difference. It is different. It is something exotic and weird. Of course, One Piece is full of these things. So why not a giant elephant in the midst of that? It reminds me a lot of various mythologies where the world rests upon the back of an elephant and that kind of thing. So there's some probably some interesting nods going on there on Oda's part. But I love it. I just love the weirdness of it. And of course, it is inhabited by the Minks, who I'm going to talk about in a bit. But these are sort of animal people. They are others. They are foreign and exotic and different. And of course, before we get going with the adventure with the Minks, they had to get to the top of this elephant. And I do want to pause to remark on this little incident because they get there with the aid of a drawing by Kanjuro, the samurai. And this drawing is a kind of a dragon-like creature that walks to the top with the crew on its back. And I find it really touching how some of the members of the crew, the more sensitive members of the crew at least, they show the capacity to connect with this ephemeral drawing. It fades away when it's served its purpose. They show the capacity to connect to it, to feel gratitude and even sorrow for it as it fades away. But the more hard-headed, tough guys of the crew, Zoro and Traffy, and I do like to call him Traffy, as Luffy does, because I think Luffy recognizes that Trafalgar Law does have this soft side, but he and Zoro pretend in this moment not to care, though I do think the panel shows the effort they're putting into covering up their emotions and their vulnerability here. It's also kind of ironic that they would feel, or at least espouse a lack of connection to a drawing, this ephemeral creature, when in fact, we feel the same kind of sense of connection. I think this could be an interesting meta moment in a sense. We feel a connection to these drawings that Oda himself has created. Luffy and Zoro and the rest, they feel like people to us, but they are actually drawings, ephemeral drawings, just like the creature that Kanjuro makes. So I find this to be a really cool moment. But I love how it shows this capacity to connect through compassion in this moment, that you go through something with somebody. And friendship can form very quickly under such circumstances. When you go through something harrowing together, it is a bond. And this is something that Frankie and Robin and Chopper, they don't mind showing that. So I like that moment a lot. Regardless of all that, when they do get to the top of the elephant, they find a very strange and exotic place. A place that, of course, being strange and exotic, excites Luffy's love for adventure. And, of course, the strangest thing of all there is the inhabitants themselves, the Minks, who are animal and people hybrids of a sort. Now, hybridity often disturbs people because people find hybrids to be difficult to categorize. People don't like things that defy their neat categories and their labels, because these hybrids suggest that those categories are probably overly simplistic, perhaps not even valid. And it can be disturbing to see that one's worldview is flawed in such a way. But I also think it is an opportunity to grow, to connect with someone else. When you realize your connection to someone that you previously thought foreign or perhaps even dangerous to you, you expand your sense of self. This is an opportunity to grow. And it can be incredibly beautiful when this happens. And it happens all the time in One Piece, especially in Zou. And look, this other, through a lack of understanding, a lack of listening, through assumption, can start out as a foe, just as the Minks and the Straw Hats start out. But these same people can become beloved through listening and compassion and connection. And we see this at play here very much. The compassion of Nami and Chopper and Sanji leads to friendship. Just look at the expression on Nami's face when she sees these people in need and decides that they're going to help. Look at how Chopper comes to the fore in order to use his doctoring skills to help these people. Look at how Sanji orders things in order to help these people in need. And I also love that this newfound friendship, this connection, is acknowledged and it's symbolized by the exchange of clothing between Nami and Wanda, one of the Minks. It is as if they're saying, I am you and you are me. That's what this exchange of clothing means. And I love that so much. And we learn about ourselves. We learn about ourselves by seeing from another's eyes. That's what can happen when you connect with someone that you previously thought different and foreign. Instead of assuming that this other is strange and worthy of hatred because they're different, we realize that from their perspective, we too are different. So, for example, instead of seeing the Minks as furry and weird, we realize that being hairless from a certain perspective is also kind of weird. And it just depends on your point of view. And when you take the time to get to know and to respect someone, their customs can begin to make sense and even become endearing. And it can also be a means by which you can better understand yourself because you're seeing yourself from that outside lens. So I love all of this that's happening between the Straw Hats and the Minks. Of course, there are those who refuse to see their connection to others, and such people often feel a deep loyalty to their own in-group, but anything outside of that in-group is evil, is other, is foreign, is dangerous. And we see an example of that in the very destructive Jack the Drought, the mammoth man, who treats the Minks, despite their similarity to him. Now, I think he's probably a devil fruit user, and he's not a mink, but he is an animal person hybrid of a sort. But despite the similarity, he works for Kaido, right? And that has caused him to dismiss anyone outside of that network. And anyone outside that network is less than human, is treated as garbage. So not acknowledging one's connection with others makes it easier to be cruel. It makes it easier to be horrible and hateful. And it's true that when you see the use of poison gas on the Minks, that is the ultimate negation of their humanity. And that is, of course, a terrible thing that we see time and time again in human history. In order to do such an atrocious thing to someone else, you have to not just otherize them, but see them as monstrous. And this, though, it must be said, sometimes such a threat can bring a fractious family together, which we see with Dogstorm and Cat Viper putting aside their differences in order to oppose this common threat. They unite together in their sacrifice, which we'll talk about in a bit. But there is this matter of Sanji. Speaking of sacrifice, there is this matter of Sanji. And even Nami, look, I'm worried, but even Nami is worried. Even Zoro is worried about his cook friend. But of course, he wouldn't show it, though. Luffy, of course, is perceptive enough to see that even Zoro is worried. But yeah, this is all about family here. This is about family in a big way. Sanji's little arc here that's going on. Both biological, as it turns out, and found family. This is all about loyalty and belonging and claims to identity. So let's put it this way. If seeing oneself as part of a family is an assertion of identity, Sanji was defining himself and his aspirations by being a Straw Hat, by being in that relationship with Luffy and the others. That identity that he has asserted, that he has formed with these friends, is under threat, as an old group that he belonged to is now reasserting itself over him. His biological family, the Vinsmokes, who apparently are a group of killers. Particularly, it sounds like the father is not a very nice chap. So I'll reserve judgment because I haven't met him yet, but it sounds like the Vinsmokes are something that Sanji was better off leaving behind. And unfortunately, though, it's often the case that when you return to an old place, and this is something that's happened to me in a more innocent way, but this is something that's happened to me. Returning to an old place that you used to belong in and that you used to live in, you can often become more like the old person that you were, despite the fact that you have changed over time. You become more like that person you were. Even though you've moved on, the people there still think of you the same way. And that has a very strong pull on you. It can be a very powerful influence on the way you see yourself. Another example of this happens with Peekums. Okay, so Peekums renews his ties to the Minks, even though he is an agent of Big Mom. And because of his renewed ties to the Minks, he feels a certain loyalty to the Straw Hats, who have just saved the Minks from their destruction. And this overrides his loyalty to Big Mom in such a way that it gets him into trouble because his colleague, Capone, shoots him in the back because of it. So in a similar way, Sanji's past, though, has come to reclaim him in a more sinister way, actually, because we like what Peekums does, but we're a little scared. I'm certainly very scared of how this past could reclaim Sanji and pull him away from the Straw Hats. But he goes along with it as a sacrifice to save his friends from Big Mom's wrath, from Capone and Vito, who seem to know something about him when Vito whispers something in Sanji's ear. I'm not sure what that was, but there is something perhaps going on there that I'll find out more about. But even as this old identity comes to reclaim Sanji, he shows his loyalty to Luffy and to the others. But, of course, I have questions. Will this marriage claim him and change him? Will it break his connection to the Straw Hats as he's forced to redefine himself again? Will his vulnerability to beautiful women make him willingly go along with the marriage alliance between his family, the Vinsmokes, and Big Mom's family? Especially as it seems to judge by the heart-shaped eyeballs poking out of his head when he sees the picture of her, he seems to find Pudding, his bride-to-be, rather striking. These are questions I have. I have worries. I'm worried about Sanji. But when he tosses away his friends and says he'll be back with a smile, my question is he doing this knowing that he won't be back, thinking that he won't be back? Is he doing this just to make sure they don't follow him in order to save them? This, of course, is a sacrifice, right? But Luffy has his response to this. He has his solution, which is he's going to ask Sanji. He's going to go ask him, of course. That's what Luffy does with his friends. He asks them. And he's going to do it quietly. That's his plan anyway. He says he's going to do it. We'll see how that goes. But there are other connections to talk about here. One, of course, being the connection between the Minks and the samurai of Wano here, particularly the Kozuki clan. And it turns out that Momonosuke is the heir to the Kozuki clan. And it's very important to acknowledge how the Minks kept safe the ninja Raizo of the Mist when Jack the Drought had come for him. And this, of course, Raizo would have in turn done the same for them because they chain him up. He isn't able to, but he would have gladly turned himself in to Jack the Drought in order to save the Minks from the destruction and the harm that was done to them. So you see loyalty and sacrifice as big parts of these claims to kinship and family. And the ultimate sacrifice is paid by Dogstorm and Cat Viper, who literally give an arm and a leg in order to save Raizo. So there's a lot of beautiful loyalty displayed in this arc. They are devoted comrades, the Minks, to the Kozuki clan of Wano, of which Momonosuke is the heir. And importantly, this is the clan that devised the poneglyphs we learned. So a little bit more about that in a bit too. Very interesting stuff I found there. But I do want to pause to note how much I love how Luffy makes Momonosuke ask for help. He doesn't allow him to do it through the others, through the samurai. That's a very important moment, I think, in terms of Luffy giving him the chance to take responsibility. In other words, Luffy is helping Momonosuke to find his voice. He doesn't allow Kinemon or anyone else to do it for him, and he insists that he do it himself, because Luffy will help a friend if the friend asks for it and wants it. And I think this plays out beautifully when the elephant Zunesha is trying to communicate, and only Luffy and Momonosuke can hear it, as apparently Goldie Roger could before, and also, of course, Momonosuke's father. But very interestingly, it is Luffy's pushing Momonosuke to find his voice that allows Momonosuke in that moment to respond to Zunesha's need and to give that big elephant the permission it needs to defend itself from Jack the Drought's attack. So I love how that plays out, Luffy helping Momonosuke to find his voice. And I believe there's going to be more about that later as this friendship between Luffy and Momonosuke develops. But about those poneglyphs, very interesting. These apparently red poneglyphs, if I have that right, there are 4 of them, and they are guides through the coordinates they give to the final island, to Raftel, where Luffy tells us the One Piece might be found. So lots of lore going on here in this little arc. Very interesting. And of course, all of this makes Robin even more crucial, since she's the only one who can read the poneglyphs. With Lord Odin, Momonosuke's father, having met his demise, unfortunately, at the hands of the current ruler of Wano, the shogun of Wano, and the Emperor Kaido. So that's going to be very interesting to find out what all these secrets are in regard to the poneglyphs and everything else. So lots going on. Also, I'm very interested in this mission to open Wano's borders. This is what Raizo and Kinemon and the others from Wano are talking about, this idea, this notion of opening the borders, because the shogun has closed it off. And I feel that this is a big theme that could be on the horizon here. The idea that you close your borders means you cut yourself off from the outside. So everyone outside those borders is other, is foreign, is dangerous, right? And as opposed to what we've seen playing out here in this little arc, which is the idea of connecting and compassion and learning and growing through those connections. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out, but we have some major collisions here on the horizon with Kaido and Big Mom. And of course, this little arc, I believe, as Oda has done several times before, I hope to see how it has set up these themes of kinship and loyalty and identity for the bigger arc to come. I have a feeling that this is going to be really important in Whole Cake Island. So I'm expecting to see these things loom large in the next arc that I'm about to read, Whole Cake Island, and I'm incredibly excited for. But that is it from me for now. Until next time.